because I saw that somebody decided to take a clip of me saying what I'm about to say for this whole stream and clip it and be like, they got me. He said he's not against capitalism. Aha, we got him. Well, I will own this because I am not in kindergarten anymore. When you are in kindergarten, what you learn to do is to point at things. You learn your numbers. That is the number one. That is the number two. That is the number three. You learn your letters. That is the letter A. That is the letter B. You learn your colors. That is purple. That is green. You learn your fruits. That's an apple. That's a banana. I am not in kindergarten anymore. And my understanding of the world is not based on walking around going, that is capitalism. That is feudalism. That is socialism. And if I still thought that way, and that was the level of political development I would have, I would never have accomplished anything in this world. But I have accomplished a darn lot. And I've built an organization and I've traveled the world and I have stood up for anti-imperialism because I have a deeper understanding. So, what is capitalism? Well, to me and to people that are part of the general scientific Marxist community, capitalism is a mode of production in which profit is the driving force. Now, that is what it means to me, and that is the phase of history that we are currently in. However, to many people around the world, capitalism means something different. Capitalism means starting their own business. Capitalism means having an idea. Capitalism means being able to not have a boss, an employer, but rather having your own business, having your own domain where you can be creative and work to achieve something, to provide for your family, to build something new. And in fact, you'll often get people saying, we don't live in real capitalism anymore, right? We don't live in real capitalism, they say. And why do they say this? Because nowadays in America, very few people have their own business where they prosper. In fact, and even those who do, they're crippled in debt to big banks, and they are facing extreme regulations written by the ultra rich to try and put them out of business. And they're dealing with people in neighborhoods that can't afford to buy their products. And when it really gets down to it, what many Americans think of as capitalism, of people going out and being creative and starting their own business and innovating, the only place that you will find that in the world today is in socialist countries. The place that capitalism, as many Americans understand it, is really in existence is China, Russia, Vietnam, Nicaragua. The place that you will find the flourishing capitalism of entrepreneurship, people working hard, people having their own ideas, a government that facilitates that. The place you will find that is in 21st century socialist countries. In China, their system is called socialism with Chinese characteristics. And if you go there, there are many different people who started their own company, started their own business, innovated, and been creative. And if you go to the socialist country of Nicaragua, led by the Sandinistas, the thing that they will brag about endlessly is their micro entrepreneurship program, where the socialist government loans money to people to start their own business. And many of the businesses that they've started are cooperative businesses where the worker and the employer are, where the workers are the employers. They are the owners of the business. And in fact, I believe there's over 5,000 worker cooperatives that have been started by the socialist government of Nicaragua. In Vietnam, almost every citizen, to some degree or other, the majority of the population are business owners and have their own enterprise. And in fact, the Vietnamese government, as part of their socialist oriented market economy, goes out of its way to train people to become business owners, to develop their own enterprises. And if that's what capitalism means to you, it means having your own business. It means being your own boss. We are not against that. And in fact, the only way we can get it is by defeating the power of the big monopolies. It is the big monopolies facilitated by the American government that are the greatest barrier to innovation and creativity and economic growth around the world. But you will not defeat the big monopolies by sitting back and deregulating everything. In order to defeat the big monopolies, you are going to need a government of action that fights for working families. You are going to need an anti-monopoly government, a government that fights in the interests of the people and fights for economic growth. You're going to need an anti-monopoly state. And in the countries that I'm describing, like China, like Vietnam, like Nicaragua, like Russia, they have a government that comes out of popular struggles, that smashes the power of big monopolies and then uses popular power to pave the roads, to build power plants, to provide services, and to loan money to facilitate the growth of the market. It is only in countries where popular power has broken the power of the big monopolies, the ultra rich. It is only there that you see a flourishing of what many Americans consider to be real capitalism or genuine capitalism. It is only by getting away from a system where profits are in command and profits have total control and creating a government of action, a popular state based on a democratic upsurge of participation among the population, that you can have in our time a flourishing market. So-called real capitalism is only possible if you have a popular state that defends it and controls the economy to make sure that no big monopolies can emerge, to make sure that the needs of society come first and the economy is directed and the irrationality of the market is not in command. Now, this is an oddly nuanced way of understanding this, but it's an important one to understand, and I will explain why. Now, I'm going to start by explaining the history of the capitalist mode of production, and then from there, I will go over the rise of anti-imperialism and 21st century socialism, and we will understand everything, because if you don't understand this, right, you're missing the boat, and there's a lot of people that are missing the boat nowadays. Hold on. Hold on. Gonna have to get out the notepad, and I'm gonna have to write it all down. Gonna have to write it all down. First things first, right? The capitalist mode of production that we live under has gone through 4 distinct stages, right? Prior to capitalism, we had feudalism. Prior to feudalism, we had slavery. And prior to slavery, we had hunter-gatherer civilization. But capitalism emerged as feudalism was being overthrown. And the first stage of capitalism was what's called primitive accumulation. Primitive accumulation. The first stage of capitalism was primitive accumulation. And primitive accumulation was when the feudal commons were turned into private property. It was when the feudal system, where everything is more or less owned by the king or by the nobility, was turned into a system where production was organized for profit. The land was turned into private property. Peasants who used to have a guaranteed spot on the land, as long as they did their work, they were suddenly told that if they couldn't pay rents, they were kicked off their land. And there was a mass period of execution for the crime of being homeless. Vagabonds were executed by the thousands in England during the reign of King Henry VIII as they were clearing out the feudal commons. The Scottish Highlands were cleared out. The Highland clearances that followed the defeat of the Jacobite uprising were genocidal, as thousands of Scottish people were removed from the land, killed, were fled to the urban centers to be worked to death in sweatshops, or fled to the United States. The clearing of the Scottish Highlands. Capitalism began with mass theft, right? The system of production organized for profit, not just capitalism, but the people who rule the world today, the big monopolies, the big landowners, they did not come by their wealth fair and square. And this is a really important thing that gets glossed over. We are often told that, Bill Gates and the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the Carnegies and the Rothschilds and all these folks, they just worked so hard for what they have. And why should we resent them? Because they just worked hard for what they have. No, they did not work hard for what they had. It was handed to them. There was a mass episode of theft called primitive accumulation. And that was the dawn of the profit-centered economy. And primitive accumulation began with mass theft, first of the property in Europe, and then the colonization of Africa and of the Americas and of Asia, the seizure of land, and the slaughter of indigenous peoples. And then from there, you had the transcontinental slave trade. And if you look, how was the land after they seized the land from the Native Americans in the United States? How was it fair? Was it fairly divided up, even among the white people? Of course not. Of course not. The big railroad companies got it all. The big banks and trusts got it all. Capitalism, the modern world economy, came into existence with a mass episode of theft. They stole it from the peasantry and the feudal commons. They stole it from the indigenous people. They stole it from the Africans. They stole it from the Asians. Mass theft is how our modern world was created. And the richest of the rich, the ultra monopolies, the imperialists, the billionaire elite that dominate the world today, they trace their wealth back to primitive accumulation. They trace their wealth back to the clearing of the commons, to the seizure of the land, the New England aristocracy, the Eastern establishment, the old money, right? What is one of the most important programs where they vet and find future leaders of this country? It's the Rhodes Scholar Program. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Rachel Maddow was a Rhodes Scholar. You look through the elite of the United States, many of them were what they call Rhodes Scholars. And where does the Rhodes Scholar Program come from? Well, it comes from primitive accumulation. A very, very wealthy colonizer, a British man named Cecil Rhodes, went out and seized a big chunk of Africa for himself and killed thousands and thousands and thousands of black Africans. And this big chunk of Africa that he seized for himself, he called Rhodesia. And he made billions and billions of dollars. And when he died, he set up in his estate a scholarship program to find elite people that would be useful in promoting the ideals of the British Empire. Cecil Rhodes the great colonizer, he was not a self-made man. He was not a creator. He was not an innovator. He was a thief. He stole a big chunk of land. He went to Africa and with machine guns sent an army of people to go with machine guns and kill whole villages of African people. And he set up an entire country, Rhodesia, where black people had no rights, where only his crew of white settlers had any say and had any authority. And that is where his wealth came from. Cecil Rhodes, the founder of the Rhodes Scholarship Program, one of the most important figures in the British economy and the British Empire that emerged, was not an innovator. He was a thief who acquired his wealth through primitive accumulation. And that was the first stage of the capitalist mode of production, was primitive accumulation, the seizure of land, the seizure of raw materials. So don't ever believe that, the ultra rich bankers, they just worked for it. Cecil Rhodes stole what he has. The New England elite stole what they have. The railroad cartels that dominated the United States stole what they have. The oil monopolies, the Rockefellers, Standard Oil, they stole what they have. Capitalism began with primitive accumulation, which was mass theft. But then from primitive accumulation, we got industrial capitalism. And industrial capitalism was the second stage of the capitalist economy. And in industrial capitalism, you had factory owners and factory workers. You had workers being hired and paid a wage and working to produce products, and then those products being sold to make profits. And industrial capitalism was a great advance. We are not against it. It was a great advance. It brought us electric lights. It brought us steam engines. It brought us railway. It brought us cars. It was a great advance over what was there before. But it also created a problem that had never existed before in history. And that was the problem of poverty created by abundance. Right? If you're making a product, say that product is a tire. Well, first you're going to need the materials for the tire. All right? The rubber, the raw materials. On top of that, you're going to need to transport the tires to where they're being sold. So that's B, the shipping. On top of that, you're going to need human labor power, workers to assemble the tires. That's C. And of course, the final price for each tire is D. What's missing here? Profit. The owner of the industry, the industrial capitalist, has to make a profit. We can't change how much the rubber costs. It can't change how much the shipping costs. So in order for him to extract from the value put into making the tire, the only place he can extract value is from the labor power. So really, C divides into C1, which is what he pays to the workers, and C2, which is what he extracts as his profit. The profit of the employer is extracted from the labor performed by the worker. Now, this is the basis for people saying that capitalism is exploitive, because the worker is not paid the full value. He doesn't get the full value that he puts into the product. He puts C in, but he only gets paid C1. But that's not the point. That's not the point. And people who talk about that and they say, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, and they're missing the point. That is not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is this. C1, which is what actually gets paid out, those are the wages, is always going to be less than D. The amount of wages paid out in the process of production is never enough to buy back the product that is produced. There is always more product created than there are wages paid out. And as a result, you will have a boom bust cycle. You will always have this problem of the wages paid out in the process of production never being able to buy the products that are created. But then it gets worse, right? So, in order to make more money, the capitalist is constantly trying to reduce the amount of wages he pays out. He wants to hire fewer workers, replace workers with machines, make workers who are there easier to replace so you can pay them less. So C, which is the amount of labor power involved in production, is constantly going down because of technological advancement. And that sounds great, right? But then there's a problem, because C2, which is the profit the capitalist makes, is extracted from labor power. So if the amount of labor power that goes into every product constantly goes down, the amount of profit that the capitalist makes in each product is constantly going down. So as a result, to make up for the fact that he's making less and less of a percentage of profit on each product, the capitalist has to churn out even more products. And this constant problem of more products existing than there are wages paid out is a constant problem in capitalism. Never before had there been a system where people were homeless because there were too many houses, where people are hungry because there is too much food. But capitalism, the capitalist mode of production, created a situation where for the first time people could be homeless because there were too many houses, where poverty was created by abundance, where people lost their jobs and became homeless because too much wealth had been created. And I've talked on here many times about the coal miner's riddle, right? The little boy says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" And the father says, "Because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the little boy says, "Why can we not afford any coal to heat the stove?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I was laid off." And he says, "Father, why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there is too much coal." That had never existed before. And this problem of decreasing the amount of labor power resulting in an economic meltdown, that is completely new. Why should self-driving cars be a bad thing? Self-driving cars should be great, but in a system where profit defines production, when the market and profits are given absolute control, that leads to a situation that we're in now, where if they implemented self-driving cars, you'd have millions of people out of work. What rational sense does it make for technological advancement and enhancing the human ability to create wealth and abundance, leading to more poverty? And that was the problem that came into existence with the rise of industrial capitalism. Never before. And the boom bust cycle was noted, where you would have economic crashes because too much wealth had been created, because there was a glut on the market, because too much wealth had been created. This had never happened before. That was industrial capitalism. However, industrial capitalism soon gave rise to imperialism. And imperialism was a whole new stage. Pretty soon, the industrialists, the factory owners, were usurped by the bankers. And there's some pretty big differences between a banker and an industrialist. An industrialist wants to sell as many products as he can because that's how he makes money. And he wants the people of the country to be wealthy because then they can buy his product. However, an imperialist, a banker makes money lending money to people. So the poorer people are, the more they're going to have to borrow. So the more money that he makes. And when capitalism moved into its imperialistic stage, it no longer was promoting development. Industrial capitalism was all about development. They wanted more wealth and more productivity in society so they could make more money. But the rise of imperialism was about seizing captive markets, seizing spheres of influence around the world. The big corporations and monopolies based in the Western countries began carving out the world among themselves and impoverishing it. And I'll talk about many great examples, right? When India was taken over by the British Empire, the people of India had these vast, elaborate looms they'd been weaving for thousands of years. So what did the British do? Well, the British went there and they burned the looms down and forced the people of India to start buying their cloth from the British monopolies, the textile monopolies that were tied in with British banks. In Mexico, they've been growing their own food for thousands of years. But then when NAFTA came in, Kraft and Monsanto set up shop, and the Mexican people had to start buying their food from American agribusiness because the Mexican farming sector was completely wiped out. And now American agribusiness dominates Mexico. Nigeria, the people of Nigeria have a huge amount of oil, but yet they're very poor. Why? Because the oil of Nigeria is not run by Nigerian oil companies. It's run by ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And there are many, many examples of this around the world. That imperialism is about holding back development and exporting the power of big monopolies. We're not talking about small stores owned by people that are creative. We're not talking about little restaurants. We're not talking about a hotel. We're not talking about somebody who has a nice idea, a new idea about a tech innovation. We're talking about huge monopolistic corporations tied in with banks, General Electric, British Petroleum, HSBC Bank is basically what dominates British Petroleum, BP, ExxonMobil, which is basically Chase Bank. We're talking about huge multinationals like Amazon and Walmart, these huge mega corporations that have governments in their pocket. They go around the world preventing countries from developing, preventing people from having industrial capitalism, preventing people from starting their own businesses, preventing Mexicans from having their own farms, preventing people in India from weaving in their looms, preventing Nigerians from saying, hey, we've got a lot of oil here, let's start extracting it and selling it. They dominate with the export of capital. These huge multinational corporations spread their tentacles all over the world, and they keep the world poor. That's called imperialism. And that is the stage we're currently living in. And it is different. And when libertarians and conservatives say we want real capitalism back, what they want is they want to go backward from imperialism back to industrial capitalism. Well, they're wrong, because industrial capitalism will eventually lead to monopolies, and those monopolies will get tied in with big banks, and then they will become imperialists. This is the natural development. Just like primitive accumulation, eventually they seize all the territory and land, then they start factories. And then they start factories, they start producing products, and eventually that leads to the rise of monopolies, and those monopolies spread out all over the world. This is a process of development. This is the natural result of the system. Well, imperialism was a stage of development where America and Britain and France and Germany got very, very wealthy by keeping Africa poor, by keeping Asia poor, by keeping South America poor. But now we are living in a time where imperialism has been usurped by a new stage of development. We had primitive accumulation. Now we have destructive accumulation. This is the new stage that we're living in. It's called the destructive accumulation. We had the primitive accumulation to begin. That's just the seizure of material. We had industrialization. We have imperialism and the rise of the big monopolies. Now we live in the stage called destructive accumulation. Because really the only way the big monopolies make profit in our time is by destroying. They destroy a country. And with the military-industrial complex, they made loads of money bombing and destroying it, and that competitor is removed from the market. They make profits from that. They get paid to unpave the roads and rip up and pulverize the asphalt. They get paid. They had a whole program to push doctors to overprescribe opioid medications and get people addicted and destroy people with addiction. We have a prison industrial complex where corporations make profits from locking people in jail. We have entered a period where the imperialists, the only way they can keep making profits is by destructive accumulation. The primary way the big monopolies make money is not by selling you tires and not by selling you McDonald's French fries. It's by destroying you, by destroying nations, destroying countries, destroying people. Even the imperialist homelands, during the stage of imperialism, America got more wealthy, Germany and Britain got more wealthy, while Africa and Asia and Latin America were impoverished. Now, the big monopolies are devouring and cannibalizing the imperialist homelands. We have entered a new stage of destructive accumulation. That is the period of capitalism that we are currently living in. Why? That brings us back to this. C is the amount of labor power that goes into the product, and the profit that is made off of each product comes from the labor power, right? And as the amount of labor power in each product goes down, the amount of profit goes down. But C, the labor power involved in production, has never been lower than ever before. C is at an all-time low. The amount of labor power that is needed now is lower than ever before. At this point, they've got computers that can trade stocks better than people can. They've got computers that can play chess better than people can. You know, this book that I wrote about Kamala Harris, do you know how many human beings were involved in assembling this book? One. I designed it. I wrote it. You know, I had a cover design, and then one person pushed a button and it churned out of a book. There used to be thousands of people who worked in book binderies creating books. Now only one human laborer is involved. And so as a result, not only do fewer and fewer workers have jobs, and we have a whole generation of young people that are stuck in low-wage, short-term service sector jobs because there's no place for them in industrial production. But on top of that, we live in an era where the rate of profit that the capitalist can make is lower than ever before, right? The rate of profit they make on the book is lower and lower than ever before because there's only one worker who pushes a button and then the machine churns it out. And that's why they are in a stage of destructive accumulation, because the rate of profit has decreased so significantly due to technology. We have a crisis before, and it is a completely unnatural crisis that we live in. Never before has it been easier to create products. We can make pens, we can make food, we can make iPhones and iPads, we can make socks and shirts cheaper than ever before. And that should be great. That should be a miracle. But in our irrational system, where big monopolies operate everything based on how much profit they can extract for themselves, it's leading to a society-wide meltdown where the only way they can make profits at this point is by destroying things, by locking people in jail, by blowing countries up, by destroying productive forces, by driving down the population. We have entered into a free fall of capitalism, a period of destructive accumulation. And so what is the way out? Well, the way out is for society as a whole to come together and say, profit can't be in command. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need the state, the government that's supposed to represent us, to control the economy, to make sure that growth continues, to make sure we don't get poorer as human productivity and technological advancement increases. And we have a 4-point plan to create a government of action that would fight for working families. The first step would be hiring millions of Americans, hiring the unemployed and putting them to work to build, to construct, to pave the roads, to build new high-speed railway, to build new universities, to revamp our power grid, to build water treatment facilities so we weren't drinking lead in our drinking water, to just completely give this country a high-tech makeover by hiring millions of unemployed people. And how do we pay for it? We put our natural resources, the wealth of the country, the oil, the coal, the timber, the natural gas, we put them under public ownership so that the wealth of our land and our natural resources goes into the public budget. And on top of that, we put the lending of money into the hands of a national bank. We create a gigantic national bank as well as some state and local banks that are community controlled, so that they lend money in the interest of the nation overall. If we want more businesses in a certain area, we lend money in certain areas. We want more working people to have homes, we lend money so that they have homes. We create a national bank and centralize credit so that credit is assigned strategically in the interest of the country. And then the fourth step is with our national bank and with our public-owned natural resources and with a mobilized population being mobilized to build the foundations and the infrastructure of the economy, we then implement an economic bill of rights, the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, and we invest in our population. And if we implemented those four steps, we would not have the problems that we have. We would once again have a productive economy, and that would lead to more capitalism. That would lead to more people starting their own store, more people starting their own high-tech company and software company, more people opening businesses, more people opening hotels and restaurants and farms. It would lead to more capitalism, more of the capitalism that people want. Just like I have seen. I went to Yalta in 2018, to the Yalta Economic Forum in Crimea, and I saw how the Russian state that controls the oil and the natural gas, they have a gigantic state-run oil company called Rosneft. They have a gigantic state-run gas company called Gazprom. They invest and they loan money, and all kinds of Russians have opened farms. They've rebuilt their farming sector. They've rebuilt their industrial sector because they use public control of natural resources to rebuild the country. I've been to Venezuela. In Venezuela, there's a building I went to called the Center for African Knowledge that's all dedicated to Venezuelans of African heritage. And you go, and the museum is on the top floor, but the whole building is all kinds of stores subsidized by the Venezuelan governments where Afro-Venezuelans, they make bags, they make clothing, they publish books on Afro-Venezuelan history. They've all been invested in because the Venezuelan state has taken control of the oil and the lending of money. So it lends money strategically and it makes money off of selling the oil. And with that revenue, it controls the economy to make sure that growth is continuing, right? It overcomes the irrationality, and it is with the defeat of the big monopolies and with public control of the banks and public control of natural resources, public control of the commanding heights of economic power, that the real capitalism that many Americans want, where they can be creative and they can be their own boss and they can start their own business, that real capitalism can flourish in the context of an overall planned economy with a government of action that fights for working families. That is what we want. And in classical Marxist terms, that would be the abolition of capitalism. But in the way most people understand it, this is the implementation and the creation of capitalism. What people who say they like capitalism like is what we want to create. We want there to be all kinds of millionaires and billionaires, people who have their own idea about how to make a socialist society more prosperous, about how to invent a new product, about how to do something more efficiently, about how to provide a service that makes life more profitable. We would like to create a situation where more people can become wealthy by doing good for society. But in order to facilitate that, we must rationally control the economy. You must rationally control the economy and get rid of the irrationality of the market. And you must defeat the power of Jeff Bezos. You must defeat the power of Bill Gates. You must defeat the power of the destructive accumulators, of the parasite class of big bankers. You've got to defeat their power. You've got to break the power of the big monopolies so that wealth and growth and creativity can flourish. If you want to have the good capitalism you talk of, the bad capitalism must be defeated. And the bad capitalism, the imperialism, the monopolies can only be defeated by popular power. Society must come together and smash the power of Jeff Bezos, take control of the oil wells, take control of the banks. We need a government of action that fights for working families and defeats the parasites so that producers of all kinds, labor, power producers, innovators, entrepreneurs, the producers of society can flourish as the power of the parasites and destructive accumulators is ultimately smashed and broken. That is what we want. We want the capitalism that you speak of, but the only way to get it is to break the power of the destructive accumulators, the imperialists, and the monopolies. That is what we want, and it will create the capitalism that many people want, and we are not against this capitalism. We are not. We are not against capitalism. We are against the power of the big monopolies. We are against a society where profit is in command and the economy is not rationally organized. And when we rationally organize the economy, and when society takes control of the major centers of economic power, this will enable capitalism as they know it, as they long for, the real capitalism. This will enable them to see it flourish as never before. And let's be very, very clear about this. And the reason that it's important to be clear about this, there's a couple reasons to be clear about this. First, the first reason to be clear about this, the reason I just want to come out and say this is, I said this on a stream. This is my position, and this has always been the position, right? Read, this is the book published by the American Communist Party in 1949. And if you read what they advocate, it talks about the anti-monopoly coalition. William Z. Foster, the great American communist, he said he wanted to create an anti-monopoly government, an anti-monopoly coalition. Look at the Chinese flag. What do the stars on the Chinese flag stand for? The block of four classes: the workers, the peasants, the urban capitalists, and the national capitalists, who were unified by the Communist Party to defeat the imperialists and create a new China. This has always been the position. But there's a reason that I want to talk about it, and I have to clarify it, and that's because somebody criticized me for saying this on a previous stream. Good for them. Good for them. I'm glad they did. Somebody pointed to me saying we are not against capitalism. We want to defeat imperialism and the big monopolies. We believe in economic growth. Someone criticized me for saying that, and they pointed at me and said, "You're not a real communist. You're not." Whoop-de-doo. Whoop-de-doo. I don't care about being a real communist anymore. What do I gain? What good for anybody does it do to be a real communist? And somebody else criticized me recently, and they said, "Caleb, we need to unite all the socialist groups." No, we don't. We do not need to unite all the socialist groups. If all the communist and socialist groups in America got together, you'd still have a tiny, irrelevant group. And in order for all of them to get together, all the tiny, irrelevant insanity that keeps these groups isolated and small would have to be respected and accommodated. I do not want unity with the PSL. I do not want unity with the CPUSA. I do not want unity with the DSA or the SWP. I want unity with the people in your neighborhood. I want unity with your neighbors. I want unity with your coworkers. I want unity with your classmates. I want unity with your family members. I want unity with the masses of American people. That is who I want unity with. And I can guarantee you the masses of the American people are not offended when I say I'm not against capitalism. Right? And that is what we need to get out of our heads. We should not be trying to please leftists, because leftists are insane. Leftists are insane. And on top of that, leftists are the foot soldiers of the big monopolies. Leftists are not fighting for what I just laid out here. They're not fighting for an anti-monopoly coalition. They're not fighting for society to rationally organize the economy so that growth is unlimited. No, leftists are fighting to defeat the small business owner in your neighborhood, and they're getting paid to do it by George Soros and Jeff Bezos. All right, let's talk about it. Why is CNN always advertising Black Lives Matter rallies? Why is MSNBC, owned by General Electric, one of the biggest monopolies, why are they always promoting wokeism? Because wokeism is not about society taking control of the means of production so that growth can be unleashed. Wokeism is about the big monopolies using their power to force degrowth onto society. And that is what wokeism is. And they're open about it. They say their vision for opposing capitalism is degrowth. Well, I don't want degrowth. I want more money than I already have. And you should want more money than you already have. You should want your family, your community, your neighborhood, and your country to be more prosperous. I don't want you to be degrown, and I don't want to be degrown myself. I want to see expansion of living standards. I want to see expansion of wealth. That's what I want. And that is what, around the world, countries that have had socialist or communist governments, that's generally what they want. They have 5-year economic plans. They build power plants. They build industries. They pave the roads. They build high-speed railway. That is what socialism has always been about. What the woke people want and what the overwhelming majority of socialists in America want is fascism. They want to save the power of the big monopolies by impoverishing the people. They want to create a low-wage prison state, a low-wage police state, and destroy productive forces, drive down our wages, drive down our living standards, wage war against countries around the world that have broken out of their system in the name of human rights or LGBT rights or whatever. They are the foot soldiers of the ultra monopolies. They are on the side of the ultra monopolies against those who want growth. The working class wants growth. That's why they hate the working class. They think the working class is racist or sexist or transphobic or whatever. The small business owners want economic growth, and that's why they hate the small business owners. They call them fascists. They want to regulate them out of existence. They want to write the laws, environmental laws or regulations to push them out of business so that ExxonMobil and General Electric, MSNBC, and the big monopolies have the power, right? This is what we're against. We are fighting against the power of the big monopolies for the global majority that wants economic growth. And we understand that the only way to get that economic growth is to have rational organizing of the economy. That is what we want. We want rational control of the means of production, and we want to mobilize a coalition of society taking control of the commanding heights of the economy in order to have growth. But the woke people, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, they want to empower the big monopolies. They want to dismantle the U.S. power grid. They want to crush the small business owners. They want to create a low-wage police state so that they can implement degrowth. We are on opposite sides of the barricade. I am on the opposite side of the barricade. The Party of Socialism and Liberation, the big socialist group in America, wants to dismantle the power grid. You don't believe me? Go and look at their website. It says they want to immediately get rid of all fossil fuel-based energy in America and replace it with sustainable energy. And by that, they mean windmills and solar panels. We would have less than 50% of the electrification of America. Is that what we want? No, I want more power plants. I want a stronger power grid. They are against nuclear energy. They say they're against fossil fuels. Okay, climate change, whatever, but they're also against nuclear energy, right? Well, it sounds like PSL has never heard of Stalin because Stalin didn't destroy power plants. Stalin built power plants. Stalin built hydroelectrical power plants. Stalin built coal power plants. Stalin built the oil industry. Stalin hired Fred Koch, the father of the Koch brothers, to go and build the oil industry of the Soviet Union. Gaddafi built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River, and started greening the desert so they could have more crops and more industrial output, right? Socialism around the world is about growth. Poverty is not socialism, said Deng Xiaoping, but to be rich is glorious, right? We are in favor of economic growth, and we want to control the means of production so that economic growth can be empowered. And we have learned during the 20th century that you need the market. You need the market, the commanding heights, the centers of economic power, the banks, the natural resources. These things need to be rationally controlled so profits are not in command and growth can be planned out. But ultimately, you need human creativity for things that make life fun. You need people competing and voting with their dollars for things like restaurants and hotels and clothing and children's toys and all the things that make life fun, there's a room for innovation and creativity and competition in those things. The market has its place, but it must be subdued, and you need a popular government to make sure that the economy is rationally organized and growth continues, and to defeat imperialism and destructive accumulation. This is what we advocate, and this is what is needed. And we need to be clear on this. And if being clear on this doesn't win me points with some socialist, I don't care, because the socialist groups in America are completely irrelevant. And this is what we've got to understand. We've got to stop thinking about being good socialists, because socialism in America is crap, and it is a mass movement working for the big monopolies to set the stage for World War III and to grind us into poverty. So stop thinking like a socialist and start thinking about how we can save our country from imperialism. Start thinking about how we can have economic growth and expansion. That is what I challenge you to do. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Unfortunately, most of the people in the pro-growth faction of this economy think if we just get the government out of our way, everything will be fine. Well, they're wrong. They are wrong. The only way we will defeat the power of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and the ultra-rich monopolies that control this country, the only way they will be defeated, and the only way we will break out of this destructive accumulation and once again have a productive economy based on expanding the population and expanding living standards, the only way that we can ever have that is with a government of action, a popular government that punches up and smashes the power of the big banks and monopolies. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a population that is mobilized to defeat the parasites and to empower the producers. That is what we advocate. And I don't care what you call it, and I don't care who I offend. This is the hill on which I want to die, because the destructive accumulation economy that we live under is leading us toward a new world war. And it is urgent that we unite all who can be united to stop the low-wage police state and stop the march toward World War III. This is the urgent necessity of the hour. And it is important to make clear that we believe in growth, we believe in human creativity, we believe in innovation. We are innovationists. We have no desire to own the red flag or own the hammer and sickle. We have no desire to try and own communism. That is a foolish thing to do in these times. It is an absolutely foolish thing to do, and an utter waste of time. We have no interest in engaging in such silliness. We instead have a desire to build and construct. That is what we aim to do. And that is what I am advocating.